concept to culture. Today we will be unbuilding the classroom with architect Madhuri Rao. She has been my mentor, my teacher. My formative years of architecture has been with her, and clearly why I was very curious on rethinking how we teach design and architecture, because she's really set the basics really, really strong for us. We talk about her even today when we as a batch sit together sharing a cup of coffee. So thank you, Architect Madhuri, for doing this with us. And before we get started with why we're here, I just sort of ask you if you could quickly tell us and tell the audience a little about yourself and what you do.
Hi, Pooja. Thank you so much for that introduction. It's just so nice sometimes to hear it from your students, even though you're a colleague now. And yeah, it's been an amazing experience, actually. I mean, you as teachers, I think we get to see what our students are doing. And my teacher told me it's a thankless job because after 20 years, someone might come and tell you it was worth it. Okay, so you have to wait till then. So thank you so much for that introduction. And hello, everyone. I'm Madhuri Rao. I'm largely an academic, but I also research and I have a small practice. I'm based out of Bangalore, India, and I have done my undergraduate in architecture from BMS College, Bangalore. Went on to do my master's at CEPT in theory and design, which really was a very, very important point in my life in that sense. And then since then, I've been back in Bangalore, and since the past 14 to 15 years, almost 15 years now, I've been teaching at, I think I've started at the fifth college now. So I've largely been teaching, but like I already said, I research and practice as well. And I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I'll sort of move the dice to asking you to sort of understand your process, your trajectory of what got you to architecture. What's your first emotional memory of a space as a child?
I think, as architects and architecture students have often asked people this question, but when it was thrown at me, Pooja, it was nice to actually, I mean, this process, is to reflect on. I think it keeps changing also, right? So, but I think for a long time I've been thinking about this, and something that's really molded me as a person, and hence even how I teach, how I work, how I practice, is the fact that I think I lived in we are a family of 40 people at any given time. So, a huge joint family, and Skanda, our family home, was interestingly an Anglo-Indian bungalow. And to me, architecture, that house and how we lived, how we used that space, is actually, I think, architecture. And for me, for 25 to 40 people at any given time to be living under one roof, that sharing of space and sharing of life, in a sense, I think has been very, very important. And it's very interesting, I think, because it has shaped the way I think, the way I practice, because for someone to be with 40 people meant to make do with less also. Space, it could mean to make the best use of everything, in a sense, right? So whether it was imagine cooking for 40 people, like how do you make, and it was the best food, right? And we're not cutting corners, but trying to make the most of things. Never had new things, right? Because many cousins, okay, before and after me, and it was not about just the four of us, my parents and my sister, but it was a much larger extended family, right? So it was hand-me-downs were the thing to do, right? And we would always do things as a family, whether it meant cooking or organizing stuff, and it meant a lot of things, I think, to be flexible, like to accommodate other people and their wishes, space sometimes, and sometimes to negotiate also, right? So you had to be flexible. You get the skills of to be accommodative and to negotiate, I think, most importantly, right? There were elders, there were younger people, and then there were male members of the family, female members of the family. So I think that equation that's remained very important to me, that to look at the collective and sharing rather than the individual. And quite inadvertently that happened to me because of my childhood.
Right. And do you think your own education has, in some sense, shaped your approach to teaching? I'm sure there's a lot of unlearning post-education, which we all go through. But What do you have to say?
Yeah, I think in hindsight, actually, that I have unlearned that my education happened in a formal classroom or the studio, like per se in architecture in that sense. And I think that was a very powerful thing that hit me, like, I mean, much later. I think this happens over the years and it doesn't tell you them. And then I was worried about why am I struggling in class? Like how does this happen? Why doesn't this seem to be happening with me or with my what I'm trying to design? But I think, like I said, in hindsight, it was those days where I would learn through the Louis Kahn trophy, which was a documentation trophy. I learned how to draw, how to use a rotring pen, how to use CAD, everything from my seniors. And it was not done through, like someone taught us, it was just like a rite of passage in a sense, and you pick up stuff like that. Or, like traveling, organizing these trips. And when you had to travel with juniors, seniors, how do you negotiate again and how does that happen, right? And I think traveling and being part of these extracurriculars was very important. But something that really triggered another or the main idea of architecture for me came from this one quizzing competition called Argument, which is still very famous and run by the Ethos Foundation by Geeta Balakrishnan. And as I think a second semester or a third semester student, I remember going there, and this whole bubble of what architecture was completely broken. I was like, my God, there's so much that we don't know. And that being a quizzer in school, actually, that was a very important point in the trajectory because I was like, I can't be this ignorant person anymore. Like, what if people are going to ask me what is this and stuff, and I can't be this? So I think the next, almost 2 to 3 years, or maybe 2 years, not 3 years, was just spent in the library. And it is almost obsessive, like let me just go through all the monographs and who's this, what did they do. And it was at first it was like, okay, who's this, what was this, can you identify this? But then I think it really laid the foundation and grew deeper roots in that sense because my first love in teaching and when I first taught also it was history theory actually stems from there. So what I could cover like very broadly, in those two to 3 years actually have held me in good stead even now because I think that was very, very important. So like I said, I think that, I mean, I unlearned when I was teaching that probably, like learning does not happen only in the studios. And because of which that
Right.
it almost always starts outside architecture, at the fringes or the boundaries of art, literature, philosophy. And for me, that is a starting point. Like, I'm really interested in knowing what does the student, what is important to the student, or how does he, she try to gauge this, right? So I think to celebrate that personal identity rather than, like, because architecture is largely like, it does not celebrate individuality unless unless you get out into practice, right? So for me, I think that is very important. Like, how can I ignite something that can have an effect even outside of the studio? Because to have a kind of effect outside of the studio and for much longer is something that is very important.
Yeah, and I think we're living examples of that. I think because we began to realize that studio is beyond those four walls, beyond the classroom. We were lucky that we met you at a very formative stage in architecture. You were with us through our first semester, right? And I think there was a significant impact or conversations around beyond the studio, not just your butter sheet, not just your drawings, which I think is very, very impactful. And I think you've worked in different capacities when it comes to pedagogy, academics in different universities, right? So what would you really call as a good architecture studio today? Again, this is very subjective. And the reason I'm asking you this question is how different is it from what a studio would be like 10 years back? Not to compare, but in today's context, with everything that's happening around the world, the students that you deal with, what do you think could be some principles we run today's studios on?
Yeah, tough one, because a lot has changed in the last 10 years. But I think it's also
Right.
important to recognize the fact that, in a teacher's trajectory, even they have grown in the last 10 years. Like you're talking about me teaching you in first year, that would have been exactly 10 years back, if I'm right. Right. And looking back, I was very hard on the students and very naive myself. So I think what is interesting though is that there is a lot of anxiety. Like with our changing times, schools, faculty, and students are very anxious to know, to find out what are they doing, what to do, and where they belong in a sense. Because I think the internet, Instagram, schools having a presence online and doling out stuff by the minute, right? So, what is my vision for the school? What am I doing as part of the studio? How is it going to have an impact? What are the learning objectives? It's good that it's happened in the sense that it's not anymore about, you just walk into the studio and just play out according to your lesson plan, because it just cannot happen. The dynamics have shifted a lot, and to expose students to much more now is very tough and is a lot of baggage for the students. And it's almost we could see it as an enabler, but sometimes it's also to our disadvantage, right? It's a very tough time to be a young adult, right? Because of the kind of distractions, because of the kind of influences. I mean, you might not call them distractions, okay, but they're just they have so many options and so less time, and the choice, there's no criteria for choice. So right. So I think it's a tough time, but I think a lot of universities are trying to adapt to this, like, and that comes with what is my stand, and it's helping them clarify what is their vision. Like, are we a theory school? Are we a making school? Are we someone who's going to be looking at the many branches of architecture? We are not going to limit ourselves, right? So that's becoming more and more stronger, I think, and managements are realizing that that is an important part of their identity in a sense, and to develop that with the correct faculty, with the kind of work, with what they are putting out there is becoming very important.
So I think because you mentioned something very interesting as baggages. I
Mm,
think I was at a seminar at CEPT, and one of the architects mentioned this when they had to redo Budge, when they were reconstructing Budge. He said the first thing I needed to remind myself was I needed to get off my pedestal, leave my baggages and my ego at the doorstep before I walk in to any project. How important do you think that is for an educator to sort of let your baggages behind? Because it's very easy to project. It's very easy for it to sort of camouflage, whether it's in designs. It's a tricky place to be because our baggages are also a fire, are also an inspiration in some sense. So, how do you sort of navigate through that?
I think it comes with experience, right? Because the studios in the East and the West are very different. The West, if you largely see, it is about trying to clarify a position of whoever is running the studio, right? Whether, like, when Zaha Hadid was at Vienna, it was a very clear agenda. Whereas for
Yeah.
us, I don't think that happens, right? And that is a difference. Though even it's changing now. We are becoming more and more focused, like I said, because what are the objectives of a studio, the learning objectives and ideas have to become very, very. A lot of it there's no room for spontaneity, because a lot of it has become quite rigid, like, lesson plans and tell me what you're doing on every single day. Students are handed that before. They know exactly when, there's no space and time for spontaneity. And similarly, I think baggages are very individual. And I think even for the students, like, it depends on the course and the tutor. And sometimes it does happen, and maybe it comes with age, maybe it comes with sometimes you're very passionate about what you're doing. Okay, but it's quite interesting actually to see if it might be good in other fields, no, to actually become as good as your mentor, or like, to perform on par with them. And I'm not sure if any of them actually have that kind of baggage. Whereas over here, we are always trying to say that, okay, this is mine. How am I not going to, like, like you said, make this baggage for the student, or like, not just take this idea and run with it, but like, how do you keep the distance? How do you make them think? It's difficult, and I think it comes with, there are many processes, one of which is, like I said, experience. How do you make the brief into something, and the dynamics of the class also matters, right? Because if a lower semester, probably you can handhold a little, but as you grow older, a thesis semester, maybe it's not. So I think it actually differs, and it's very tough for an architect. I mean, it's not about being an academic or a student, but even an architect, like how would you say that you have to get off your high horse and there is nothing else to do? You have to do that in a buj or in a, like in a disaster relief situation. There's something else that's more important.
Mhm.
So that
Right.
sensitivity, I mean, not just architecture, but I think any field it comes with
Everywhere.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And today, considering as a practitioner in India, right, we have a lot of cultural significance,
Hmm.
especially with the indigenous materials, our building technique, so many different things. I think architecture in some sense is very holistic. I think once you graduate, you cannot look at life the same way that you did 5 years before. As you said, the co-curricular activities, the field trips, the surveys, it completely, there's a new lens you sort of put on, right? So what I want to sort of ask is the reason we call this concept to culture, right? From a concept, finally you're having a cultural impact. How important is it for us as architects to strengthen this process? Sometimes it's not completely the output, almost always, but I think it's that process, that concept to culture. Every week we're coming into studios, there is architectural design we're doing, there's reviews, and we're finessing our designs. But can you tell us the importance of this storytelling, this concept making, which finally leads into an output?
Hmm. Yeah, I think, I mean, like we always say, process is the most important, right? And I think, for starters, as an academic, I always believe that academia is the ideal place, right? And is the ideal in a sense, because a whole lot of, I mean, the other position is that academia should make students ready for the field in a sense, right? For practice. I'm a strong non-believer of that idea because I think what happens in academia is you're learning ways to think, and then to clarify your own, right? Whereas practice is skill based. You're going to be picking up these skills on the job, right? And to make them practice ready would really be killing. I think it's violent in that sense to prepare them for the practice in schools, because I think that's really a place where you have to learn to think critically. Because unfortunately, education up to then, university, and is not about lateral thinking, is not about critical thinking, right? And I think that becomes a a key idea when you want to, because it is the place for your ideas. And I think um, obviously there are different positions, like I said, that it could be like, a completely service oriented studio or sustainability or whatever, that they're doing now. But I feel really it is the place for ideas. So personally, I think they can figure out how to do the technicalities. We are not preparing them to figure out how exactly a staircase works, what services works, or toilets, like which is a, no, but I mean, okay, we'll go beyond that. Now it's come to a point like whatever you visualize, someone will find a way to build it, right? So why are we focusing on how do we build it in a sense? But like I think it is about ideas. And if you've seen in the last with AI and generative software, it is. I don't think it will ever compare to like real intelligence. And I think we have to prepare students for that. And for me, that is very important. Like you said, it's not about the product, because how much of what we do in the studio actually happens in the process, it's not even one third of
Right.
what probably in the lifespan of a building, like from concept to when you actually build it, it's not even one third. Okay. But why is it the most important? I feel it's the most important because you're going to have specialists, you're going to have consultants who are going to help you along the way. So I I believe that concept to culture is actually very
Hmm.
interesting, and I feel that is what happen or should happen in colleges and schools and studios, because that is the intangible. That is
Yeah.
you cannot teach people this. You can only show through
Yeah.
examples how people have thought about it and how they have tried
Hmm.
to reach out and present it in a sense, and manifest that concept, right? And I think that's the beauty of it. And that's something that really powers me, like every single day. I go out there, I go to college to look for that. I feel that's very, very interesting to me. And that is
Right.
the concept, and the process is very, very is the most important for me.
Yeah. And thank you for mentioning that sometimes school has to be about ideas and, discussions and dialogues and what can you do beyond just the built environment? What's led you to create that built environment, right? Because I think there is a lot of pressure today on schools. You hear this even amongst young architects who've just graduated. It's very easy to say, "Oh, I did 5 years of architecture. I don't know anything," right? But in hindsight, only as you keep evolving, growing, peeling off some layers of your own self, you begin to realize how much of your personality is developed and how much dialogue and how much, again, right? Maybe you're not able to do everything, but you're able to storytell, you're able to sort of curate. And I think in the world that we live in today, sensitivity would be the right term. I wouldn't say it's a good or it's a bad thing. Today, emotional intelligence is almost of the highest priority. Whether you're a student, you're a teacher, you're a practicing professional. I also feel there should be more dialogue around this in studios. Emotional intelligence. Are we dealing with our clients with more sensitivity? How are we sort of working around the ethical part, the societal impact? Do you think these dialogues today, especially considering 2025, I feel the generations now are very aware of these things. So do you think it's important we work around this, or sometimes it's okay to just stick to just the conventionality of what we need to sort of be executing?
I think that's again, it's a very interesting question, Pooja. And what I think is the last couple of years, I can say actually, maybe post pandemic, in that sense, it actually shook up the systems quite a lot. Okay, because I think this, like you're saying, these generations, this who are standing up for issues like this, and they are voicing things that are more important. Okay, not just providing a service in that sense. And it's interesting, but like architects, as it is, we are dealing with quite a lot in the 5 years that we do. But like I previously mentioned, it is going, all the other professions are also going through this, like empathy and emotional intelligence and ethics, and all these are important. And I'm glad things are being brought to the forefront, because quite literally they were being swept under the floor, right? And it is a good thing, though at the same time, I feel that it's a tough ask, because the foundations of all these are quite are what do I say are so set in stone, literally, right? So I'm happy it's happening, though I think it's going to take a couple of maybe decades for it to actually um, take head, in a sense, because I think the previous generation have to slowly make way for this, right? So it's going to take time, but I can see that there is a heightened awareness, because all the clients are also from this, are in this bracket, this generation who are asking for stuff like this. So like I said, it's for all professions, and it's tough for architects, okay, considering already that they're doing so much, and it's quite a emotionally, mentally draining profession for us before the client or anyone comes in. At the same time, I think it's a good thing that's happening.
Yeah. And what do you think really should change with the approach to architecture?
I don't think architecture is going to remain autonomous anymore, and it's just a matter of time that this happens. I think that's the most, from when I studied to when you studied to what it is now, the kind of diversification that has happened in architecture, that there are schools training their students to be so-called non-architects, in a sense that they could get into journalism, policy, styling, right? I think that's very, very interesting for me. And the fact that we have to be open to change, and that's how it's going to evolve. For me, that is going to be, I think, a big, we can already see it with the admissions in architecture, right? And it's dropping. People are moving towards design, moving towards more wholesome ideas, where architecture is a branch. And I see that happening in the future, actually, that uh, it will be good, and you'll have to learn to upskill more, faster, to be relevant will become very important. I think it's not going to be doing the same thing or teaching the same thing over and over again. That's not going to hold good anymore. And that's a good thing.
Sort of evolve with the time and to find,
Yeah.
adapt, right?
Yeah.
There is, yeah. So I think I'd sort of wind up by, you've answered this in some sense, but I'm still sort of curious. And I love asking this question at the end of every podcast. Why do you show up to do what you do every day? There are so many things happening in the world, but why this one particular thing?
I think it's the only thing I know how to do and I really, really enjoy. And when work becomes play, they say probably you found your ground in a sense, right? I think that's my sacred space. To go walk into a classroom, to walk into a studio is very, very liberating. It just makes you someone else in a sense that you forget that there is nothing else that's going to be bothering you and you are completely immersed in something, and that's really something I look forward to, that is my space and I don't have to worry about anything else. And I think it's a great privilege also to grow old and still be with young people. And I think that also has occurred. I mean, off late, I've been thinking, oh my God, I taught this person 15 years back. Yeah, it seems weird, but at the same time, I think like, wow, I mean, isn't it amazing how much my students, who are my colleagues, have grown now? And yeah, I was in the same room 2 weeks back with someone who has taught me and someone I taught. All of us are an amazing cohort now. And I thought that doesn't happen too often. And that was great to know. Yeah. Yeah, I
I
think.
think more than anything, these have such a cascading effect, right? And also, somebody sprouted that seed in you where you decided you want to pay forward someday. Maybe you sprouted that seed in me where I've decided I want to pay forward someday. And it's so beautiful that each of us are bringing our most real selves to the world and making this a better place, hopefully. And thank you for doing this, Architect Madhuri. This was such a good conversation. Thank you for talking about so many different things related to pedagogy and how do we unbuild the classroom.
Thank you so much, Pooja. It was such a wonderful time. I'm so happy.